Welcome to this week's online Bible class from Pine Valley Church of Christ. And last week we started a new series called Struggling with God. It's something we all do, whether it is those of us who have put our faith in Him through Jesus Christ and dealing with the situations of this life and this world, having doubts about why He does certain things, or why do certain things happen to me, or even for those who are not true believers or not followers of Jesus, and struggling with this world, with the idea of a God who allows bad things or evil to happen in the world. It's a difficult thing for us to really look at and examine, and that's what we're trying to do. And we began last week at looking at the life of Jacob and the struggles that he went through, and which God led him from being someone always looking for an advantage to someone who finally realized he needed to give up and give himself to entrust to the will of God in his own life. Let me pull up our screen share for today, as we're going to be moving along in the history of Israel. And we want to move now on to the time of Joshua. We recently studied the book of Numbers and saw the struggles of the people in the desert, which led to the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, which we'll review briefly. But we really want to look at Joshua and contrast to the people. He and Caleb as well. It is something we can just quickly review through Joshua's life. He was born in Egypt, the tribe of Ephraim. He was a witness to the plagues and to the Exodus, to the parting of the Red Sea. He was, we are told from this early age, probably in his young 20s, as he is counted in the census and becomes a military leader, and that he becomes Moses's assistant. And even on their way to Mount Sinai, the Amalekites decide to attack them, and it is Joshua that Moses entrusts with leading the attack on the enemy. And of course, we're going to see him take the leadership as they go into the land of Israel. He is there to witness God descending in fire and lightning and smoke on Mount Sinai, and he accompanies Moses on his first trip up to the top of the mountain to meet with God, and is there when the 10 Commandments are given and many other laws about the people and living in the presence of a holy God. He is also there when they come down from the mountain and they find the people worshiping the golden calf, and involved in all sorts of ungodly things in their lives, because they had gotten tired of Moses being gone for so long. He later is designated by God himself as Moses' successor. And at the end of the 40 years of wandering, he, along with Caleb, are the only two from the previous generation who enter the promised land, in contrast to those who were constantly rebelling against God and unwilling to give themselves in trust and faith to him and to those that he appointed to be their leaders. So he is the one who leads them across the Jordan River. He sees the mighty hand of God at work in the city of Jericho and the tearing down of the walls so that they can attack. And he sees, as witnesses, numerous victories throughout that only can happen at the hands of a mighty God. One in Joshua chapter 10, when the 5 kings around Jerusalem band together to attack Gibeah because they had made a treaty with the Israelites. He goes to the city he sneaks up on them at night. They begin the attack early in the morning, and God is giving them a great victory, and so he wants to make sure that it is complete, and he asks God to hold the sun and the moon, to cause them to be still so that they could have the daylight. And we are told there that it stayed that way. The sun stood still for about a whole day. Magnificent type of thing to try to envision and wrap our heads around, especially in our world, in which we know that is not the sun and the moon that rotate around us. It is us who is rotating around the sun, and it is the earth that is spinning, bringing day and night. So try to wrap your head around that one. The control that the Lord God, creator of the universe, has over his creation. But he sees these things and he responds to them, and it gives great glory to God in each time. He is a keeper of his promises, whether it was to Rahab and her family when they attacked Jericho, that they would be spared, whether it was to the people of Gibeah who deceived him into thinking that they were not part of the tribes that were living in Canaan at the time, but lived far away, only to find out that they lived nearby. But Joshua says, well, we've made this promise, we've made this covenant with each other, and we will keep it, to the point of coming to their defense when they are attacked by these other kings. And of course, in doing everything that God asked him to do, everything that Moses shares with the people that God is going to do through Joshua, Joshua carries through all the way to the end of his life, to the victories and the proportioning of the land and giving it out to the 12 tribes, and to the very end of his life, and the promises that he has made to the Lord his God. And he, as again, part of that is the giving out of the inheritance, and doing it, he and Eleazar, by lot, just as God had instructed them to do. But there's two defining moments. One sort of at the beginning of the story of Joshua's real involvement with the people, and one at the end of his life that play an important part. In Numbers 13 and 14, which we studied recently, but want to review, in the spying out of the land, we are told that Hoshea, who Moses changes his name to Joshua, is the one who is chosen from the tribe of Ephraim to be one of the spies. Caleb from the land, from the tribe of Judah, and then all of the others who go into the land, spend 40 days spying out the land, and come back with 10 of the people come back with a troubling report. The land is beautiful. It has great bounty in it, but they go on to tell the people, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. It's interesting. The list is given just as it was by God to Abraham in Genesis 15, that these were the tribes that he would punish for their ungodliness and give this land to his people. But now his people were refusing, or not believing, that God can do this for them. It's interesting that it's Caleb who speaks up first. No recording of Joshua saying anything at this time, and it may be, we know Caleb is 40 years old at this time, from his speech later in the book of Joshua. And it may be because he is the elder statesman to Joshua that Joshua lets him take this time, or maybe he is more convinced because of Caleb speaking up. Well, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the people immediately start saying, no, we can't do this. The fortified cities, the giants, the people with organized armies and weaponry, leaving out who their God is and what they have already seen from him. And so they say, let's go back. Let's choose new leadership and go back. And it is on that next day when they are ready to rebel and go back to Egypt, which is a total rejection of the work and the promises of God, that Joshua and Caleb stand up and begin in verse 6 of chapter 14, the book of Numbers. They begin and say in verse 7, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. When Joshua is presented to the people as the successor to Moses, Moses challenges the people to be strong and courageous as they enter into this new land. He tells Joshua, I want you to be strong and courageous in how you lead the people. And he and Caleb both are doing that now and telling the people, don't rebel against God. Don't be afraid. If the Lord is with us, then we can do this. He is the one who brought us out of Egypt. He is the one who has shown himself to us and brought us into his presence. But they still rebel. And it is then pronounced by God that this whole generation, because of the rejection of him, none of them except for Caleb and Joshua will enter into the promised land. The rest will have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every day that the spies went throughout the land. And only Joshua and Caleb, and he specifically mentions Caleb later here in chapter 14 as one who Caleb has a different spirit. Verse 24, but because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. It is then later that as he speaks to all the people, that he tells them that only Caleb and Joshua will go forth because they are the only ones who trusted, who were strong and courageous. And I love that description. It's used of few people throughout the Bible, that Caleb follows me wholeheartedly. He has a different spirit that doesn't look at just the physical, the strength of the world around him, but trusts in his God. When we go over to Joshua 24, the people have wandered through the wilderness. They have entered the land, the leadership of Joshua. The old generation is gone, all except him and Caleb. They have taken various cities, great victories given to them by God. He has divided up the land amongst all of the peoples. And it's interesting in that section, earlier in, it begins in chapter 14 of Joshua. As he begins with the tribe of Judah, but within Judah, it is the first inheritance is given to Caleb. And Caleb comes to him declaring that he was 40 years old when he spied out the land. It's been 45 years since. He is 85 years old, but he is strong and vigorous and courageous as he was 45 years earlier. And he says, do what God promised and give me the land where I spied out, I walked over. And it is the land, the hill country that is full of the fortified cities and the giants. and he is ready to go. The last inheritance that is given is finally by the people. They give to Joshua the inheritance within the tribe of Ephraim. Again, a beautiful spot that he had requested and been part of in his life. And so they give him territories. End of verse of chapter 19, they allotted portions, and Israelites gave Joshua son of Nun an inheritance among them, and the Lord had commanded them. They gave him the town he asked for, Timnath Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built up the town and settled there. And he continues to lead the people for a number of years. And we get chapter 23, we're just told it's many years later. We are later told that Joshua is now 110 years old. But he calls the people together. He's already talked to the leaders, and he wants to continue to challenge them. And he gives them, at the beginning of chapter 24, a history lesson, reminding them all the things God had done for them, and that they do not need to forget. And so he says, now, a necessary decision has to be made. You're here. So beginning in verse 14, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your forefathers, worship beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord, or Yahweh. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your forefathers or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he continues to challenge them. They say, oh, yes, we will definitely serve the Lord. And he says, no, you're not able, verse 19, to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. And they continue to insist. And he challenges them to the point where they declare their faithfulness to him, and they draw up an agreement in which they agree to be witnesses as a confirmation of this challenge, this to faithfulness to the one true God. And again, the demand that he says to them in verse 23, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. Remove everything else. Remember his law. You shall have no other gods before me. And Joshua, as Jacob did earlier with his family, said, we need to get rid of all these other gods and focus on the one who is the God of Israel, and yield our hearts to him. Be strong and courageous as Moses challenged us to be. And he and Caleb have done that. And so we have to look at this in the context of all of the unfaithfulness that went on around them, the battles against fortified cities and giants and all of these other things. And one of the greatest struggles I'm sure Joshua had was with just the people themselves, especially that earlier generation, just like Moses. And, as I entitled this lesson, Conquest, it's not just about the conquest of the land, but it's about God wanting his people to understand that he wants them to be conquered by him in their lives, so that they too will follow him wholeheartedly. And that is something which we have to seek today. So what is a wholehearted response, as we have seen throughout this story? That we focus on God's promises and power, not on who we are, not on whatever our temptation or obstacle or horrible person working in our life is, but on God's promises and his power and what he can accomplish for us. Be strong and courageous. Why? Because of who God is. And we can face up to anything that goes on in this world if we trust in him and give ourselves to him wholeheartedly. Getting rid of any other gods, whatever that might be, whether it is actual pagan gods, whether it is money, possessions, fame, fortune, power, drugs, alcohol, anything else that is in the way of our lives being given to him completely. This is Jesus's point when he makes the statement, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Get rid of those things that are in your life, even other people, if they are getting in the way of giving yourself completely to God. Then you can truly yield yourself. You can, like Jacob, say, I give up. I am conquered by you. And that's when the power of God can truly work in our lives. Whether it's an individual life or it's the life of a congregation, in seeking to do the will of God, focused on his promise and his power and not who we are. And we seek to be an example to others. We seek to pass it on. We seek to mentor younger. We can only imagine the kind of influence that Moses had on Joshua's life, having been mentored by him for 40 years. The influence of Caleb in his life, seeing the stance that he took in front of all the others in the face of a bad report. The example of Caleb when he came forth and said, I'm 85 years old and I'm ready to take on the giants. This is the example that needs to be set for others by more mature Christians. It is an example that parents must give to their children and share with them and tell them about the faithfulness of God and all that he has done and what he has promised and what he can do in our lives. And be willing to come to that decision. Doesn't matter what anybody else around us decides. As for me and my house, we will follow the Lord, the God of Israel. For he is the one who has rescued us, brought us out of the greatest slavery in the history, the slavery of sin and death caused by our own sin and selfishness. It is a choice that has to be done every day, who we will serve. And then we can go forward. We can be an example to our families and to others. We can share the good news of God and his son, Jesus Christ, because of God's power, what God has done. And when we give ourselves to him wholeheartedly, we can be strong and courageous because we have been conquered by the love and grace of God in our own lives. We are happy that you joined us for this lesson and that it has been helpful to you. We're going to continue on looking at other individuals in the history of Israel. And again, the name Israel meaning struggles with God. And next week's lesson will focus on Samuel, who as a young boy is taught lessons about how to listen to God. And that is something that we will look forward to next week and hope that you will join us for that. Between now and then, may God bless you and keep you healthy and safe.